Look at that. All right, we are now streaming live on YouTube on the John Lavenia Success Mastermind. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to today's general session. Today is Tuesday. What's the day? Oh, it's June 21st, is it? It's June 20th. It is summer solstice. Happy solstice, everyone. And I am your host, Stuart Wild. I'm a student of mindset and philosophy and prosperity consciousness, just like all you guys. And I am so grateful to be able to be with you guys to talk about stuff that I'm interested in, science and spirit and manifestation and all kinds of cool stuff. Last week, we got kind of esoteric and we dove deep into spiritual and mental alchemy with the 7 steps of personal transformation. Today, we'll do a little turn in a different direction, and then we'll come back to esoterica and alchemy and hermeticism in the very near future. I do want to mention, we were just talking about solstice, and Gail and I both are spinal surgical twins, and so we've supported each other through, or at least Gail supported me through our spinal surgeries. So today is 1 year to the day that I was admitted to the hospital for a double spinal fusion of L5 and S1. And prior to that, and those of you that know me know that, you know, I've been a wilderness guide for the last almost 30 years. And the last several years of the before surgery was really a challenge for me. And I started to fall apart just before COVID. And so surgery has been great. I'm now a year to the day post-op. And so, woohoo! I could do a little John Lavenia, go up and do some pull-ups, but I won't. But I'll at least just tell you that I feel fantastic. I feel like a new man, and I'm loving the bionic spine. You know, it was a big deal, big hurdle mentally to get over. And I've been actually wanting to share this little story with you guys for a year. So I will. So day one of surgery. Now, as you guys know, you know, we spend a lot of time working on our mental game, our mental diet, being aware of the thoughts that cross the threshold into our mind, being mindful of dispelling and repelling negative thoughts, harmful thoughts, and things like that. And being somebody who considers myself at least a student of keeping my mind in check and working on my mindset, I had spent the last several months prior to going into surgery, and that was actually why I had signed off from doing general sessions on this network, was because I really wanted to focus on my mental game before surgery. And so here I was, I got admitted to the hospital, and I'm laying there waiting to get, first waiting to get the anesthesia and then get wheeled in for the first of 2 procedures, because this was a 360 spinal fusion that I went through. It was the first day they came in through my abdomen, the second day they came in from the back. So it was very interesting. And so here I was laying on this hospital bed, trying to just keep my head straight about everything is going to be perfect outcome. The doctor coming and talking to me about how they had never seen a more perfect procedure and how everything just went miraculous. And I'm listening to some kirtan, which is essentially Hindu chanting, and kind of on the lines of Hare Krishna, or various different chantings to get my mind in shape. And as I'm laying there, and I've talked to John about this, we have an ashram that was built and dedicated by Ram Dass, who some of you may know as being the author of Be Here Now, which was sort of a counterculture anthem of the early 70s. And anyway, in his later years, he has since passed, but in his later years, Ram Dass was in a wheelchair. He had a stroke. And so here I am in my hospital bed listening to this chanting, and I start thinking about Ram Dass because I had the privilege of meeting him before he had passed. And I have this vision of Ram Dass, and he's in a wheelchair, right? And so here I am about to go into spinal surgery, and I got this picture of this guy in a wheelchair, and I'm like, oh my God. And so I went through this whole thing of like, no, not me. I'm not in a wheelchair. I'm not in a wheelchair. And it literally took everything I had mentally to sort of erase and reset my mindset before I went into surgery. And it was just one of those funny things, because here I am, thinking that, I got my head in shape all together, and then all it takes is one mental picture that throws you off your game. And I know you all know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to do great. This is going to be great. And then the one little thought that you don't want creeps in, and you have to put all your energy into getting rid of it. So anyway, I've been really wanting to share that with you guys for the last year. So I'm glad that I got to. So there you go. So today, what I'd like to talk about is decision-making and the different types of decision-making that we do. Something called cognitive bias that some of you guys may understand, the things that kind of force us without even thinking about it to make judgments or think a certain way. And so I put together a pretty cool presentation. One of the books that I had read recently was called Thinking Fast and Slow by a guy named Daniel Kahneman. And I see Bob shaking his head. Maybe you've read that. And then a book that I read many years ago by a guy named Malcolm Gladwell, who some of you may know from his podcasts or as an author. And he wrote a book called Blink about making decisions on the fly. And what's interesting is these two books kind of contrast each other, where Gladwell takes this approach that, the best decisions that we make tend to come from the gut and from the hip, and tend to be these immediate, intuitive decisions. Whereas Kahneman comes from a more psychological perspective, and he actually debates what Gladwell says about making quick decisions. And so I think it's interesting. I'm going to present this information. We can kind of have a chat about what you guys think about thinking fast, thinking slow, and we'll go from there. So without further ado, good morning. Let's see who else is with us. I see we have Daisy. Hi, Daisy, and Edward in the UK, and Lynn in the UK. And so happy solstice to you guys as well. And Lindsay and Mandy. Wow, we definitely got some Euchers on the call today. So nice. All right, guys, I am going to share my screen. And I always have crazy titles for my little presentations. And then by the time I send it off to John, I distill it down, so we'll see what's going on. But we're calling today Thinking Fast and Slow, Cognitive Biases, Critical Decision-Making, Self-Reliance, and No-Win Scenarios. And maybe Glenn will join us by the end of our session today to talk about no-win scenarios, because that's totally in his wheelhouse. Can you guys see my screen? And can you see me as well? And everybody can hear me? Give me the thumbers. Yeah, okay, good. Boom. So there's something called the baseball problem. And Kahneman kind of opens his book with this thing called the baseball problem. And I wanted to share it with you guys. This is something I've actually been wanting to share with you guys for a while. And I'm going to open my chat here. And I want you guys to drop me a yes or a no in the chat if you have heard of what's called the baseball problem. And if you haven't, don't look it up because I'm going to go with it. Oh, here we go. Yes or no? You guys heard of the baseball problem? I'll take that as a no. I got 2 no's. Good enough. That's a no. Oh, Bob, of course. Well, then, Bob, you got to keep it to yourself, buddy. Okay. So here's the baseball problem in a nutshell. Here you go. Yeah, it's not Chicago Cubs, Lindsay, and it's not are the Cubs going to win another World Series in the next 100 years. That is not the baseball problem. So the baseball problem goes like this. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And before I jump in and give you the answer, I want you guys to kind of shoot from the hip. First thing that comes to your mind, drop it in the chat. What do you think the answer is? I want everybody, I don't know how many people there are, 8, 10, 12 people. Everybody, 11 people, drop it in there. How much does the ball cost? Bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? I'll wait for a couple more people to answer. Seems pretty easy, right? It's a very simple question. You could do the algebra, you could do the math. And if you want me to, I'll whiteboard it and do the algebra with you because it's fun. Okay, so we got several people here that say 10 cents. Catherine says 5 cents. Very interesting. Anybody else? Okay, so did you guess 10 cents? Some of you did. Most of you did. 50% of Harvard and MIT students got this wrong. And so did most of you. So check this out. The answer is 5 cents. And so think about this for a moment, okay? If the ball costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1 more than the ball, then the bat would cost $1.10 and the ball would cost 10 cents and that would equal $1.20, right? And so the answer is 5 cents. And so if the ball costs 5 cents, then the bat would cost $1.05 and that would equal $1.10, right? Or what do we say? Well, you know, one quid. I don't know how you UK guys talk money. 1 quid 10. So anyway, that's the answer. And what's interesting is that this has to do with what's called the intuitive bias, because really it's kind of the first thing that comes into our mind because it's sort of the easy, I love it, thank you, it'd be a cricket problem. It seems like an easy enough question. And so your brain kind of, you know, as much as we like to tout our own mental prowess, the reality is, you know, our brains are kind of lazy and look for the easy solution for things. And when we come up with an answer that seems plausible, it's actually a struggle cognitively to sort of overcome the inclination to think that that's the answer. And so let's talk about intuitive bias for a second. So again, that's the tendency to assume that the first or intuitive answer is always correct, right? Because not always, we don't always do that. And for those that got it right, I imagine, Catherine, put in the chat, did you come up with that immediately, or did you actually think it was 10 cents first and then you kind of worked your way through it? And so again, the intuitive, easy, or plausible answer comes to mind. Our brains tend to look for the easy way out, which means really like less thinking, right? Less effort, so to speak. And it really does take effort to override this tendency and actually think things through. And so this is what Kahneman calls thinking fast. I want to do this quick, cool little thing about cognitive biases. Has anybody seen this chart before? It's actually very cool. And I won't go through all of them. Sorry, guys, I got some beeping going on here. So the cognitive bias of anchoring is the first thing that you judge influences your judgments of everything else that follows, right? And so if you kind of come to a conclusion, whether it's right or wrong, then it has a strong effect on every other decision that you make from that point on. The sunken cost fallacy. Let's say you made some investments, right? This is all pretty pertinent as our economy is, tail spinning, in some ways. And so, you invest, whether it's money or mental energy or emotional energy into something, and you tend to stick with it. You don't want to sell that stock because, it's going to go up. It's going to go up, right? Or you want to stay vested in that. Confirmation bias is, you tend to believe the things that confirm what you already believe, right? Declinism is interesting. You remember the past better than it was, and you expect the future to be worse than it will be. John's favorite is the Dunning-Kruger effect. He's talked about this a bunch on book study. Now, what's interesting is this talks about the Dunning-Kruger effect from the standpoint of the experts that tend to second guess themselves. The more you know about something, the more likely you are to be less confident and second guess yourself. John has also explained this as when you have a little bit, it works the opposite way as well. When you have a little bit of knowledge, you kind of think you know more than you do. And also, let's say you don't know how little you know. You're blind to your own ignorance. Let's say you're ignorant about your own ignorance. You have the placebo effect, of course, which if you believe something is going to work or is true, then then that becomes true for you. The halo effect, right? If you tend to put somebody on a pedestal or somebody's a celebrity or an idol, then they can do no wrong, right? And this person said this was true, so it must be true. The bystander effect is very interesting. I call it the somebody get a sponge scenario, meaning you expect somebody else is going to save the day or do the thing. So I always say, something spills and you stand around waiting for somebody else to get a paper towel or somebody get a sponge, when of course you should be the one getting up and getting the sponge. Optimism bias, meaning you think that things are going to have a more positive outcome than they might actually do. Now, of course, we know in our mindset studies that thinking optimistically actually does have an impact and an effect on the outcome, as consciousness is the missing ingredient in manifestation and how the world works. Then we have the pessimism bias, right, where you overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes. Let's call that the Eeyore effect. And then there's negativity bias, where our brain actually is wired to think of things. It's kind of crazy and sad, but we tend to think of things from a more negative standpoint. I think it's like 80% of our thoughts are actually negative, and again, maybe not ours here in this mastermind, but in general, human beings. The curse of knowledge. Once you know something, right, Bob? This is Bob's bane, right? Once you know something, then you expect everybody else to know it. It doesn't always work out that way. Anyway, that's all cool stuff. And if you guys, I'll obviously post this on the Facebook page later. So Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow talks about the two systems of thinking, and he talks about kind of the two parts of our brain, and he calls it System 1 and System 2. In Pitch Anything, Oren Clapp talks about the croc brain, and that's what thinking fast is. And so this is sort of the instantaneous or almost instantaneous decision-making process. This is the intuitive thinking is really what it is. Instinctive, the emotional response, automatic thinking. I think about driving as an example where the amount of data that comes into our brains, honestly, through our optic nerves when we're driving, I think it's billions of bits as you're driving. Imagine, the signs and the other cars and the distance and the speed, and here comes the bouncing ball off of the sidewalk and all these things that we have to do when we're driving. And once we are dialed in, all that stuff kind of becomes automatic. And what's interesting is that you can do several things at once as long as they are easy and they don't take up too much mental real estate. Once you have, like, if you're driving and you're doing all kinds of things, you can eat while you're driving, right? You can, grab a sip of water or whatever it is. Obviously, we don't text while we're driving and things like that. But the moment you have to start doing like higher mental functions, like math problems or whatever it might be, then all of a sudden your level of ability drops staggeringly when you start doing more things at once. And then the concept of almost auto hypnosis. Like for many years in the off season, meaning when I was not guiding wilderness trips with llamas, and before I started doing snowshoe trips in the winter, I worked as the daytime chef at a resort hotel at our local ski area. And I had to open the restaurant at 5 a.m., which meant that I was leaving my house at about 3:45, 4 a.m. And I was dodging deer and elk on the highway and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And sometimes I would get to work and I wouldn't even remember driving there, right? And that's sort of, I'm sure that's happened to a lot of you guys, that sort of automatic experience where you're just kind of dialed in and you're almost in an auto hypnosis kind of thing. And again, this is really the croc brain. This is survival mode. This is the fight or flight, the sort of, is this food? Is it, something to be afraid of, right? So this is a much older part of our brain. This is the amygdala, the brainstem area. This is kind of the oldest part of our brain, which is why they call it the reptile brain. Whereas system 2, and we'll call system 1 the intuitive thinking. Kahneman calls it thinking fast. System 2, he calls thinking slow. We could call it the cognitive or the reasoning part of our brain that actually takes deliberate effort and a certain degree of concentration, right? You got to really think about the things, right? This is about reasoning and logic and putting your brain to work to solve complicated problems. This is associated with the higher functions of thinking and cognitive functions. And this is the neocortex that Claff talks about. Very nice. Kat says that it was a quick decision for her. That's great. So again, much newer part of the brain. It's actually thousands to maybe tens of thousands of years old compared to closer to hundreds of thousands to million year old for the amygdala. So thinking fast, thinking slow. Intuitive part of your brain, reasoning, cognitive part of your brain. Here's some quotes from Daniel Kahneman. We can be blind to the obvious, and we are also blind to our blindness, right? So this is kind of what we were talking about in terms of the Kruger, what's it called? Essentially, being ignorant to our ignorance, right? And then
Dunning-Kruger.
Dunning-Kruger, thank you, my friend, John. Excellent. Don't do too many things at once while you're driving, brother. All right.
I won't.
Here's another quote. Nothing in life is as important as you think it is while you're thinking about it. Meaning, while we're thinking about something, that tends to be the most important thing, right? And we tend to give a whole lot of power to the one thing that we're thinking of. It's the most important thing in the world. And then after a while, or when you're done thinking about it, you realize, that wasn't such a big deal. Why did I put so much, energy into that? And guys, as we're going through all this, I definitely want you to either be, making mental notes of things that I want, I'd love for you to share. And so in contrast with Thinking Fast and Slow, the book Blink by Gladwell is called Blink, the Power of Thinking Without Thinking, right? And this is kind of the shooting from the hip, more intuitive decision making. And Gladwell's approach in the book is that the initial intuitive response is usually correct. And as a wilderness guide, as somebody who's used to making decisions on the fly in, let's say, under duress, under distress, in highly stressful situations, I tend to agree more with Gladwell's approach, and yet I tend to have a fusion of those two concepts. And so again, I want to hear what you think about that. Gladwell talks about thin slicing, which essentially is just skimming and getting as much information, kind of speed reading. John knows about speed reading. He's talked about speed reading. I remember, and maybe Bob, you remember the Evelyn Wood speed reading course. I remember television commercials for that in New York growing up. But this concept of taking in as much information as possible and then making a decision. Gladwell says that the most accurate decisions that are intuitive have to do with reading the emotional states of others regarding their actions and motives. And again, this goes back to the ancient parts of our brain where our survival actually really depended on, are you friend or foe? And being able to make that decision on the fly, right? Because your life and the life of your clan depended on it. You know, was the saber-toothed tiger, a friendly little kitty, or was that somebody that wanted to tear you apart? And so there are pros and cons to this, right? Because we already learned through the baseball bat, the baseball problem, that our initial intuitive response isn't always correct. Sometimes it is, right? And if you listen to Gladwell, he'll say it's most of the time it's right. Kahneman kind of says, well, if you're thinking fast, you're not really taking in enough data to make a well-informed decision. So there's kind of pros and cons to this. And I kind of agree with that not every decision that we make, that we shoot from the hip, is going to be the right one. When I first saw the baseball problem, I totally got it wrong. And to the point where it was hard to even wrap my head around what the correct answer was and why. And then of course, as I kind of went through it, of course, it's, super easy. But once you kind of wrap your head around something in a certain way, it's hard to unsee it that way. So, bottom line with Gladwell is, when in doubt, go with your gut, right? Intuitive is the way. And here's a couple of Gladwell quotes. The key to good decision-making, knowledge, it's understanding. We are swimming in the former, we are desperately lacking in the latter. I'll say that again. The key to good decision-making is not knowledge, it's understanding, right? So knowledge plus experience equals wisdom, or knowledge plus experience is understanding. We're swimming in the former, we are desperately lacking in the latter. Another quote by Gladwell here: there can be as much value in this is where obviously you get the title of the book, there can be as much value in the blink of an eye as in months of rational analysis. And, it's interesting for me, being somebody I would consider myself an analytical person, and yet I also tend to be really intuitive and have to really train myself to make decisions on the fly. So I want to hear your thoughts about these two parts of your brain and what you guys employ in your methods of thinking, and if you use both. Now, of course, there's a whole chapter in Think and Grow Rich about making decisions, right? It's chapter 8, and it's the 7th principle on decision making. The subheading is called The Mastery of Procrastination. And our friend Napoleon Hill says that procrastination is the opposite of decision, and that the lack of decision is the main cause, or one of the main causes, of failure. And that a definiteness, he talks about a definiteness of purpose, but also a definiteness of decision, at least in this chapter. And a definiteness of decision requires courage. And in this chapter, he talks about what he calls the most momentous decision that required courage. And those of you that have read the book and those of you that understand what he's talking about here, he's talking about the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And that those gentlemen, 50 some odd, Bob, how many people signed the Declaration of Independence? Let's say 50, look it up for me, man. I want to say 50 some odd people signed the Declaration of Independence. And 56, very nice, thank you, sir. And that all those people essentially were signing their death warrant. They all knew that by signing that, they were becoming de facto terrorists and traitors to the crown, and they were all putting their lives on the line by doing it. Napoleon Hill really admires and talks about the courage that it took for these guys to put their names on the piece of paper. And of course, John Hancock said, "Come and get me," by signing, super, super large. Here's a couple of quotes from Think and Grow Rich from this chapter or about decision-making throughout the book. Successful people make decisions quickly and change them very slowly. Unsuccessful people make decisions very slowly and change them often and quickly. So again, this is more in line with the Gladwell blink approach, right? Those who reach decisions promptly and definitely know what they want and generally get it. This is also the first quote is kind of the ready, fire, aim approach, right? Shoot from the hip, make the decision, because otherwise, you tend to get paralyzed analysis paralysis, right? You can think about something and not make the decision, right? The most important thing is making that decision, and then you can adjust course while you go. There's an old navigation term, I can't remember, but has to do with, you're constantly tacking back and forth in a ship. But when you look at the overall course, it's a straight line to the destination. But if you really spread that or shrink the graph, let's say, you would see that it was a much more zigzaggy approach. So it's all about adjusting course while you're en route. So let's talk for a second about critical decision making, and this is kind of my own take on things here. A little bit of all of these different approaches. So intuitive bias, right, is this sort of just make a guess, right? What's your first response? And as you guys know, or at least those of you that guessed that it was 10 cents, right? We understand that maybe our first guess, our intuition isn't always the best, but both Gladwell and Kahneman talk about expert intuition, which really comes from experience as well. So there's sort of this intuitive mind that comes from education and experience. And so this concept of expert intuition is what I would say for me has been the source of decision-making in the field, right? And as a wilderness guide responsible for large groups of people under adverse conditions for days at a time, making on-the-fly decisions about weather, lightning storms, hailstorms, electrical storms, setting up camp versus going another mile to set up camp, things like that, dealing with customers and clients that are experiencing altitude illness or having medical problems on the trail, right? This all requires very quick decision-making, especially when you're talking about life threats, medical conditions, and things like that. And so I am fond of the concept of expert intuition, where it's not just totally shooting from the hip, but you're incorporating some data in that decision-making process. And so we can call this system 1 and system 2. Maybe instead of thinking fast versus thinking slow, let's call it thinking fast and slow, right? And somehow creating a hybrid process. Nice shades, Bob. And what's interesting about this is these parts of our brain tend to work against each other, and they're not necessarily in symphony with each other. And it actually takes effort to get to either have the perspective to be able to look at it from the intuitive angle and then take a half a step back and gather some more data before you jump in, right? And so for me, that I think is the goal, is to think fast and slow and think fast, make a decision. Because there's this whole thing, we were talking about analysis paralysis, right? And so if you have too much information, you know, you're at the store and there's two types of jam, and it's like this kind or that kind, strawberry or blueberry or whatever it is. Okay, I'll take the blueberry. But if it's literally 100 different types of something, you could just spin your wheels and spin in circles and, you know, spend a half hour there thinking about which decision to make. I put these together because I think that they tend to go together. And so this is an interesting thing, because a lot of what we learn talks about seeking expert counsel and expert advice. And of course, in Think and Grow Rich and in other books, well, Napoleon Hill talks about the invisible counsel and having his sort of round table of experts that he seeks counsel with. And in the book that we just read in book study, come on, what was the name of the book? Unbelievable. But the gentleman visits with experts, Abraham Lincoln and Harry Truman, Civil War heroes, things like that, and sort of seeks counsel of experts. And there's pros and cons to that, right? Because there's a part of me that really feels like it's important to seek counsel. And there's also a part of me that feels like it's really important to seek our own counsel and make our own decisions about these things. In You Were Born Rich by Bob Proctor, he talks about keeping your own counsel. And so I'm of two minds with this, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about it. And I've got some Emerson quotes from Self-Reliance that he really encourages us to keep our own counsel. Napoleon Hill talks about inspired actions or inspired hunches, inspired ideas, right? And this is related to infinite intelligence, right? And so this maybe is the missing ingredient when we start talking about intuition, is our will in alignment with infinite intelligence versus just kind of cowboy shooting from the hip kind of thing. And again, this is kind of about trusting our inner voice. And really, again, bottom line, whatever you do, make a decision and take action. And as John would say, high integrity action. Here's some quotes from our friend Ralph Waldo Emerson, who I'm quite fond of, in his essay called Self-Reliance. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. A person should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across our mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages, right? So again, we need to give more credence to our own thought process and our own opinions than we do to the opinions of others, celebrities, bards and sages, right? Else tomorrow, a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. One of my favorite quotes, right? So if you don't listen to yourself, someday somebody's going to tell you your own opinion. And you can go, oh yeah, that's right. That sounds right. I thought of that, right? But you didn't own it, right? And that's really the key, I think, is this concept of trusting ourselves and trusting our inner voice. And so now you know what kind of where I stand on this concept of thinking fast versus thinking slow. definitely this hybrid approach. But if I would say that I had to lean in one camp or another, I'm much more about trusting your intuition and going with your inner voice, as long as you are kind of clear, a clear channel to infinite intelligence and cosmic consciousness and awareness, right? Here we go. Where's Glenn? So I've been a Star Wars buff, a Star Trek buff for much of my life since I was a young man, and in the second Star Trek movie called The Wrath of Khan, it opens with the academy scenario where it's a training scenario called the Kobayashi Maru scenario, and it's called the no-win scenario. And of course, Captain Kirk is the master of does not believe in the no-win scenario, and I'm also a fan of this. And so Glenn, I think last week, did a great chat on he had a quote from Emerson about if you think you've exhausted all your possibilities, well, you haven't, and there's always another way. And so in Star Trek, the Kobayashi Maru scenario is you're the captain of a ship, and there's a distress call from another ship called the Kobayashi Maru, and it's in Klingon space. And so if you go to rescue the crew of this ship, then you're creating a violation of interstellar space, and it's an act of war. But if you don't go to rescue the ship, then the people on that ship are going to die. And so what Kirk does is he actually he reprograms the simulation to make it so that the Klingons actually recognize his name, and then they all work together to rescue the crew, and he avoids an interstellar act of war. And that's how he kind of beats, some would say cheats, but that's how he beats the Kobayashi Maru scenario. So I'm a big fan of the there is no such thing as a no-win scenario. We talked a little bit about a book called The Third Door, which is the concept is the first door is the door that everybody goes through. The second door is like the VIP door, access for the important people. The third door is the way in that you have to make yourself, right? And it doesn't matter how. It's either kick in the back door, punch your way through, get a blowtorch, and cut a hole in whatever it is. You make your own way, because there is always another way. And there you go. So that is my chat today. I'm going to stop my share. Very nice. Awesome, you guys. So what do you think about that? I'd love to hear your thoughts about critical decision making, thinking fast and slow, no-win scenarios, the baseball problem. Let me hear what you guys have to say. Cognitive biases. How does this play a role in your life? How do you guys tend to make decisions? Gail, what do you think?
Keeping with tradition, normally Missy is the first one to speak, but in her absence, I will speak for her. Or at least I'll speak for myself, because actually she and I have had discussions about this, because thinking fast, thinking slow is a lot based on personality type. And she tends to be, although she will deny it, I say you're an extrovert. You always make yourself, your presence known. She said, I'm very shy. You can fool me. I tend to be very introverted. I stand in the background, and I only speak when I think I have something of value to import. And this is one of those occasions. Stuart, I love the analysis. I think you are absolutely correct, because there are elements of fast and slow thinking, regardless of your personality type. I don't necessarily think one is superior to the other. It's a matter of circumstance. And my example from history is D-Day, when Eisenhower was presented with the facts of the invasion. And the overarching consideration was the weather. The weather was completely against them. And he got the final weather report after having already delayed the invasion by 24 hours for the sake of the weather, hoping it would clear up. Night of June 5th, 1944, he said, after all due consideration, just, well, we'll go. That's it. He stuck to his decision. That's not necessarily contrary to what Napoleon Hill said, though. I mean, he got all the facts and figured, I have no more facts that I can work with. This is what I have to work with. I'm making my decision right now, and it's irrevocable. I believe that is probably the greatest paradigm of decision making that we can all have, and that is get all the available facts at your disposal. Don't clutter your mind with extraneous and with what ifs. Deal only with the facts as you have them, make your decision, and go with it.
Thank you. What a great addition to this topic. Yeah, I agree with you that I don't think one is superior to the other. I think that they have evolved with us in different parts of our brain for different reasons, right? And I think that when we are metacognitive, meaning when we can think about our own thinking, and we can sort of be half removed from that process, or have some perspective on that process, then we can reap the benefits of both of those processes in both of those parts of the brain. I love the D-Day analogy, and timely, of course, because that was just a few weeks ago, right? And so, yeah, almost Truman-esque and thank you for reminding me of the name of the book, The Traveler's Gift, that we read, the last book, where he visits with Harry Truman, talking about dropping the bomb and things like that. So yeah, talk about decisions that have consequences. Hi, Gail. How are you? How do you like to think? What do you think about all this?
Well, I love your whole presentation. And many years ago, I did read the book Blink, and I really loved it. If you ask me now, I can't tell you much about it. I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember thinking at the time, wow, that was really good. But you also talked about intuitive thinking and learning to trust your gut or your thoughts. And over the years, for me, I've found to do that is a good thing. Whenever I've had this feeling in the center of my body that yes or no, that it's, I should do this or I shouldn't do that, and I ignore it, I pay for it. And my son, Stefan, just last week, he sent me some information about an apartment that he was going to be looking at. And just from the way it was worded and written, my gut feeling was don't touch it. And he didn't. And I'm glad, because I think it was a scam. But I've just found, for me, over the years, to learn to trust that feeling, that thinking.
Agreed. And I think for some of us that comes naturally, and for others of us, it takes a little training.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can train yourself, to improve on that.
Yeah, because it as important as it is for us to trust other people, right? It's also can be a challenge for us to trust ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And some of those Emerson quotes about trusting our inner voice. And what's interesting is, I don't know if you guys know this, Bob, maybe you know this, but when we talk about going from the gut and thinking from the gut, there's actually a physiological component to this. And this is the solar plexus.
Yeah.
Right. And the solar plexus is essentially the brain of your stomach, if you would. And this is when you get butterflies, or when the sensations that you get. And literally, it's the second largest concentration of nerves and ganglions.
Right.
Somebody look that up for me. Gangliones, next to the brain, right? And we have this amazing, like all the other nerves in our body all kind of come into play in our center, right, in the solar plexus. That's also why when you get punched in the gut, or you fall on something or whatever, you get the wind knocked out of you. That's kind of that area, the solar plexus. But very interesting that is the other sort of thinking part of our body. And when we talk about going from the gut, right, or a gut feeling, that's exactly what's going on there. So cool. Thank you for sharing that. I'd love to, we got a few more minutes. I'd love to hear from anybody else. Lynn, what do you think about all this?
Okay. You were talking about how you have a hybrid system running. I think probably a lot of us do in terms of it's like, on the one hand, you've got the slow thinking, which is you gather information, and then in the moment you make a decision, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not an actual plucked it out of the air. You've got all these resources at your command, and then when it's appropriate, then you know what's the right thing to do.
I think that's a perfect analysis. And it plays into this concept of decision making. You make a decision in a moment, but really it's all of the moments leading up to that moment that affect that decision that you think is a snap decision, right? But it comes from all this information that we've taken in, whether it's through experience, through our whole lives. And it's very rare that, and maybe when, as we get older, of course, we have more experience and more wisdom with experiences, circumstances, events, dealing with people, things like that, to the point where, again, we're trained to make those decisions. Whereas maybe when you're younger, your gut instinct, may not be as refined, let's say. And so I love the concept of, when we actually are making that decision on the fly, we've already taken in terabytes of information to be able to make that decision. Well said, well said. Let's see who else we got here. We got Kat. I want to hear from Kat. What do you got going on? I want to hear how you arrived at the answer to the baseball problem so quickly. Okay, maybe she's not here. Anybody else? John, what's your thoughts, man? Are you driving? I don't want you to multitask. Mandy, I see Mandy showing up. What's up?
Hi, Stuart. I was
Hi,
out in the sunshine. I love all of this. So I'm really like the other three that I've said before. So I would make a decision. So I make it slowly, but I'm basing it on all the facts, but I don't change my mind quickly. I'll make a decision. I get as many facts as possible, but not like 100 jars of jam or anything. I just get as many as possible, make a decision based on that, and I won't change my mind unless I get new facts come in, which make it a good reason to change it. But at that point in time, that decision sticks. And it does depend on how important the decision is to me. So if it is a pot of jam or something, I probably would just like, okay, I'll just go strawberry or raspberry. I'll take one of them and just, exactly. And also, I think I can make quicker decisions. I do definitely use my intuition, the intuitive response. So even with the other decision, I would say, okay, so how does my gut feel about that? But over the years, I've definitely got it where it says something in my head, as well as that feeling in the gut, which says you need to do this or don't do that. And I won't do it. If it's like Gail was saying about, if you've got that feeling, it's usually right. So don't go ahead and do it.
That's when you kick yourself in the ass afterwards too, right? You're like, oh, I should have stuck with, oh, I totally knew. Oh, why did I
Yeah.
go against my...
And sometimes it's something simple, like somebody says to you, you need to pick that up when you're in a shop or something, and you don't pick it up. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. You don't pick it up and you get home and you realize you're out of it. And it was telling you, or you need it 3 days later, but you didn't get it. And so usually when your intuition's telling you something, it knows more than you do about what's coming up. It's definitely worth trusting it. And when you were talking about cognitive bias, I was thinking it's slightly different, but when we speak to people that we've been with a long time, or like my son or something, they usually answer you a certain way. I might have been into it, and I think it was, cognitive. So you hear what they usually say. They might have said something, so it might be like they're always moaning at you because you haven't got out the door yet or something, and they'll say something to you at that time, and you'll automatically assume they're moaning at you because you haven't got out the door yet, where really they've said something completely different. But you automatically jump to hear what you think they would normally say, even though it isn't what's said. And it's like, oh, okay, you realize it, you just put it in their mouths.
Well, that's
And
interesting. That it sounds like a cognitive bias, right? Where we tend to take, hey, Missy, where we tend to take, it's almost like a prejudgment. What some, and maybe it has to do with track record or, previous experiences, right? Versus seeing things with a fresh perspective every time, which is really probably the healthier way to have human interaction, right? Versus like, oh, well, this person, and this is probably most true, right? With the people that we're closest with, right? Bob and Missy, right? In couples dynamics or close family ties and things like that. We tend to sometimes we can misunderstand, or somebody says something and we get offended about, the way we think that they said something or meant something in a certain way and they really didn't, and all that. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mandy.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for sharing. Nice to hear your voice today and see your face.
Brilliant.
Kat, what's up? I see your little orange hand.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation. See, I was always the other way. I was really intuitive as a child. I would just make snap decisions. But then after my mom and stepdad got married, he was always wanting me to explain why I would make decisions. And so I learned to doubt it because I didn't know how to explain, why I had made a decision, what had led up to that point. And it was like, it would just be little bitty things. And so I'm having to relearn now to trust that inner voice, that it knows what it's saying, even if I can't articulate, what it has picked up on. So I love this because I don't like explaining things.
Well, and I mean, this is like, well, why did you make that decision? Well, maybe you don't always have a very analytical reason, because it felt right. And, I'm sorry to hear that, maybe there was some trauma or shame associated with that, or at least anxiety associated with that, where, where you felt like you had to justify your intuitive nature or your intuitive decisions. And a lot of times there is no justification, right? It's just, that's what felt right to me. And and so I'm glad to hear that you have overcome that, or you're working through that, and that you are honoring your intuitive self, because I think it's critical, just like we've been talking about. And again, I think that, just like Bob said, there is no better or worse, right? These parts of our brain in terms of decision making have evolved for different reasons. The quick make a decision, because your survival depends on it, versus the, hey, take a minute, take a deep breath, let's think about it, right? And if it's something that's not absolutely critical to make that decision in the immediate moment, maybe you take a half a step back and you gather some more information before you make that decision. So absolutely. All right. Anybody else? Nice to see your face, Missy. I'm sorry you missed us. What do you think about decision making? Bob was talking about thinking fast and slow, and that you guys have had some discussions about that. Are you a fast or a slow thinker by nature?
Well, I'm a fast reactor. I react before I think, which is my problem. My Italian genes just go like this. And my Irish genes try to pull me back, but either way, I'm wrong. No, I feel shifting in me from all that we have been doing, you know. I mean, when I saw the topic for this, I was just like, oh my God. And then something came up and I couldn't get to it, but I can watch it. I'm just looking at the chat. I don't know what you people are talking about. But yes, the enteric nervous system. Yes, Bob, very good.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for the plural of ganglion.
I need to trust myself more, and that is what I've lost that ability. But I shouldn't say that. I've misplaced it, and I'm recapturing it and recreating it if I have to. Whatever I have to do is coming back. And my faith is increasing, my faith in myself and my living from the end, me, is, that's right. Neville Goddard is an
How Goddard of you. How Goddard of you.
But it's this group, this mastermind, this like-minded group of people is one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me in my life. And you certainly are. And everyone on this group is, sometimes the people that don't even say anything are adding to it just by their presence, and they're quiet. And it's, I don't think that I've ever spoken to Edward. And Daisy's always, I think, maybe you're both at work, but there's just something about you being here that is helpful. And I just want to thank each and every one of you.
That's awesome. Yeah, Daisy, we have to call out sometimes. I think she told a cool story about when I did the fires a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And Edward used to be very vocal, and we haven't heard much from him, but I'm so glad to see him on call as well. And Edward, one of these days, man, we want to see your face and hear your wisdom. Well, very cool. It's a few minutes after the hour, and what a great discussion. I thank you all for being here, for all of your input, and thank you, Lindsay. And yes, Missy is amazing, as all of you are. And so again, thanks so much for being here. This is going to wrap up our general session for Tuesday, June 20th, 2022. And you guys have a wonderful day, and get stuff done, be productive, make your dreams come true. And we'll see you. Let's see, is there any housekeeping? I don't think that there's any evening sessions. And so there's that. And so we'll see you tomorrow for a general session with our friend Glenn Henderson. And again, thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next time. Cheers.